I'm too young to settle, she laughed, canceling our honeymoon to go find her purpose with her ex. I donated her ring to a pawn shop for charity. She just returned knocked up and abandoned, wondering if I'd consider being the baby's real dad. Hey folks, before we jump into the video, please consider subscribing and giving a thumbs up if you like seeing karma work faster than expected. Thank you. Let's dive in. Sarah and I had just gotten married at the courthouse 3 days earlier, nothing fancy but meaningful to me, and I was still mentally adjusting to calling her my wife when she dropped the bomb that would reshape everything I thought I knew about commitment. We'd been together for 2 years, lived together for 8 months, and I genuinely believed we were building something solid together, the kind of partnership where you plan vacations 6 months in advance and split the mortgage payment without keeping score. I'm a project manager for a mid-sized construction company, the kind of guy who reads the fine print and believes in following through on promises. So when Sarah started acting distant right after we signed the marriage certificate, I initially chalked it up to post-wedding stress rather than recognizing it as the first sign that my new wife was already planning her escape route. David, we need to talk about Hawaii, she announced on Thursday evening while I was researching snorkeling tours for our honeymoon trip, her voice carrying that rehearsed quality people use when they're about to detonate someone's world. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been comparing resort activities, genuinely excited about our first trip as a married couple to Maui, the destination we'd chosen together after months of planning and saving. What about Hawaii? Our flight's on Saturday morning, and I already confirmed the rental car pickup. She sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the same spot where we'd planned our courthouse ceremony just weeks earlier, but now she couldn't quite meet my eyes as she delivered her prepared speech. I can't go, David. I'm too young to settle into this whole married suburban life thing. I need to find my purpose, discover who I really am before I commit to being someone's wife. The words hit me like cold water, not just because of their content but because of how casually she delivered them, like she was canceling a dentist appointment rather than destroying our honeymoon plans. Sarah, we literally just got married 3 days ago. You seemed pretty sure about committing when you said, "I do," at the courthouse. Her expression shifted to something that looked almost annoyed, as if I was being unreasonably dense about her very reasonable need for self-discovery. That's exactly the problem. I rushed into this without thinking it through properly. I need space to breathe, to figure out what I actually want from life. I set my laptop aside and studied her face, searching for any sign of the woman who'd been excitedly planning this trip just last week, talking about learning to surf and watching the sunset from our balcony. Okay, so we postpone Hawaii. Take some time to figure things out. Marriage is an adjustment for everyone. She shook her head with the kind of patronizing smile you'd give a child who doesn't understand why they can't have ice cream for dinner. It's not that simple, David. I've been talking to Jake about some things, and he's offered me a chance to join him on a cross-country road trip. It's exactly what I need right now, a real adventure to help me rediscover myself. Jake, her college ex-boyfriend who'd conveniently resurfaced in her life about 6 weeks ago, initially under the guise of reconnecting with old friends but apparently with much bigger plans in mind. You're talking about going on a road trip with your ex-boyfriend instead of going on our honeymoon. She actually laughed at this, a sound that was equal parts dismissive and cruel. See, this is exactly what I mean about you not understanding. It's not about Jake being my ex, it's about having the courage to embrace real experiences instead of settling for some boring resort vacation where we just sit around the pool for a week. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was calling our carefully planned honeymoon boring while describing a road trip with another man as brave and authentic. Sarah, we just got married 3 days ago. How is abandoning your new husband for a road trip with your ex-boyfriend anything other than completely insane? Her eyes flashed with something that looked almost like relief, as if I'd finally given her the reaction she needed to justify what she'd already decided. This is exactly why I need to do this, David. You're so focused on rules and expectations and doing what you're supposed to do that you can't understand someone who wants more from life than a mortgage and a minivan. I felt something cold settle in my chest as the reality of what was happening finally crystallized. When do you leave? The question came out calmer than I felt, but I was already starting to process this like a project that had gone sideways, mentally cataloging the damage and planning next steps. Tomorrow morning. I'm flying to Denver to meet Jake, and then we're driving to California together. It'll probably take a couple weeks, maybe a month depending on what we discover along the way. Tomorrow morning, less than 24 hours from now, while I'd assumed we'd be boarding a plane to Hawaii together. You've already bought the ticket. It wasn't really a question because I could see the answer in her face, the guilty excitement of someone who'd been planning this betrayal for longer than she wanted to admit. I bought it last week, right after I talked to Jake about his plans. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you without making it sound worse than it is. Last week, while I was confirming our honeymoon reservations and researching the best local restaurants, my wife of -2 days was secretly booking flights to meet another man. How long have you been planning this, Sarah? She had the decency to look slightly ashamed for about 3 seconds before her defensive walls went back up. It's not like I planned to hurt you, David. But when Jake reached out about this opportunity, I realized I couldn't ignore what my heart was telling me. I need adventure, real experiences, not just settling into some predetermined life path because it's what society expects. The way she said it made her sound like she was embarking on some noble quest for authenticity rather than abandoning her husband for a joyride with her ex. So what exactly are you telling me here? That our marriage was a mistake? That you want a divorce? She waved her hand dismissively as if the question was unnecessarily dramatic. I'm not saying anything that extreme. I just need some time and space to figure out who I really am. You'll understand eventually that this is better for both of us. You can go to Hawaii by yourself if you want, or maybe just cancel the whole thing and save the money. We could probably use it when I get back. The casual assumption that I'd be waiting around for her return, combined with her practical suggestion about saving money, told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed our marriage and my role in her life. The next morning, I watched Sarah pack her designer clothes and expensive electronics into 2 suitcases, leaving behind everything practical like her work clothes, winter coats, and the coffee maker we'd bought together just 3 months earlier. She moved through our apartment with the efficiency of someone who'd mentally checked out weeks ago, carefully selecting only the items that would enhance her road trip adventure while abandoning anything that represented our shared domestic life. I sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee from the mug she'd given me for my birthday, watching my wife of 4 days prepare to leave me for another man, and felt something shift inside me from heartbreak to a cold, analytical clarity about what needed to happen next. I left you a note explaining everything, she said while zipping up her larger suitcase, not quite meeting my eyes as she spoke. I know this seems sudden, but I really think this is what's best for both of us in the long run. The note was on her pillow when I went to get dressed for work, written on the expensive stationery her mother had given her for Christmas, with her careful handwriting explaining that she'd be back when she's ready to be a real wife, and asking me to try to understand that some people need more from life than just settling down. I folded it carefully and put it in my wallet, not as a keepsake but as evidence of exactly how little my feelings mattered to the woman I'd married. After she left for the airport in an Uber that I watched pull away from our kitchen window, I called in sick to work and spent the day methodically erasing every trace of Sarah from our shared space. I packed her remaining clothes into boxes for donation, removed every photograph of us together from frames and storage, and collected all the gifts she'd given me over 2 years into a neat pile by the front door. The engagement ring she'd left on the bathroom counter went into my jacket pocket, not because I was sentimental about it but because I had specific plans for that particular piece of jewelry. The local pawn shop on Maple Street gave me $3,200 for the ring I'd saved 6 months to buy, a princess-cut solitaire that had cost me nearly $5,000 when I'd purchased it with such optimistic plans about our future together. The pawn shop owner, a weathered man in his 60s who'd probably seen this exact scenario play out countless times, didn't ask any questions when I declined his offer to hold it for 30 days in case I changed my mind. Cash sale, no paperwork needed, he said, counting out the bills with practiced efficiency while I signed the simple receipt that would become the only remaining evidence of my former engagement. I drove directly from the pawn shop to the Riverside Homeless Shelter on 4th Street, the same facility where my construction company had donated materials for their kitchen renovation 2 years earlier, and handed the entire $3,200 to the director along with a request that it be used for their emergency assistance fund. "This is incredibly generous," she said, preparing a donation receipt with the date and amount carefully documented. "Would you like us to send acknowledgement letters or tax documentation to anyone specific?" I gave her my information but specified that no public recognition was necessary, explaining that this was a personal donation made in memory of something that was better off forgotten. The receipt went into my wallet next to Sarah's note, 2 pieces of paper that represented the complete transformation of my perspective on marriage, commitment, and the difference between loving someone and being convenient for them. Over the next 3 days, I turned our shared apartment into a space that reflected only my own taste and priorities, replacing her decorative pillows with comfortable furniture, her scented candles with practical lighting, and her inspirational wall art with actual books and tools that served real purposes. The silence in the apartment wasn't lonely, it was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced since we'd moved in together, free from the constant background noise of someone who needed to fill every quiet moment with chatter about her feelings, her dreams, or her dissatisfaction with whatever wasn't exciting enough for her restless spirit. I kept only one reminder of our relationship, the receipt from the homeless shelter, folded next to her goodbye note in my wallet, not as torture but as evidence that I'd transformed her abandonment into something genuinely useful for people who actually needed help. 2 weeks after Sarah left, I used the money we'd saved for our honeymoon and the security deposit from our shared apartment to put a down payment on a 1920s Victorian fixer-upper in the historic Riverside district, a neighborhood where people actually invested in their properties instead of treating them as temporary stopping points between adventures. The house was a disaster when I bought it, with peeling paint, a leaking roof, and electrical wiring that probably violated several safety codes, but it had good bones and unlimited potential for someone willing to put in the actual work rather than just dreaming about transformation. I'd always been handy with basic repairs from growing up in a family where you fix things instead of replacing them, but renovating an entire house required learning skills I'd never needed as a renter, so I spent my evenings and weekends teaching myself carpentry, plumbing, and electrical work through YouTube videos and trial-and-error experimentation that occasionally resulted in minor disasters. The first major project was the kitchen, where I ripped out decades of poorly planned additions and restored the original layout with custom cabinets I built myself using reclaimed wood from a demolished barn outside town. My neighbor Frank, a retired contractor in his 70s, started coming over with coffee and unsolicited advice that actually proved invaluable, teaching me the difference between doing something fast and doing it right, a distinction that applied to much more than home renovation. Marriage is like a foundation, he told me one Saturday while helping me level the kitchen floor. If you rush the preparation or use cheap materials, the whole structure's going to shift and crack eventually. Better to start over with quality components than try to patch a bad base. Frank introduced me to other neighbors who appreciated craftsmanship and attention to detail, people like Maria, who restored antique furniture in her garage workshop, and Tom, who'd spent 5 years rebuilding a 1970s motorcycle engine with the same patience I was applying to my house restoration. Within 3 months, I discovered a passion for woodworking that went far beyond basic home repairs, spending my free time creating custom furniture pieces that combined traditional techniques with modern functionality, and I started haunting estate sales and antique shops looking for pieces that could be restored and resold to people who valued quality over convenience. The rescue cat happened by accident when I found a skinny orange tabby hiding under my back porch during a thunderstorm, too scared to come out but too hungry to stay hidden when I offered food and patience. I named him Charlie after my grandfather, who taught me that the best relationships are built on consistent daily actions rather than grand gestures, and Charlie became my workshop supervisor, napping in sunbeams while I worked and providing the kind of companionship that doesn't require constant entertainment or validation. My furniture restoration business started as a hobby but quickly developed into a legitimate income stream when people began commissioning custom pieces after seeing my work at the local farmers market, where I'd set up a booth selling refinished chairs and tables alongside vendors who grew their own vegetables and baked their own bread. The community that formed around shared appreciation for craftsmanship was entirely different from the social circle I'd known with Sarah, people who measured success by the quality of their work rather than the excitement of their experiences, who found satisfaction in improving things that already existed rather than constantly seeking something newer and more stimulating. By the end of my first year in the house, I'd completely transformed both the property and myself, creating a space that reflected my own values and priorities while developing skills and relationships that felt substantial in a way my marriage never had, surrounded by neighbors who understood that the best things in life require patience, commitment, and the willingness to keep working even when the process isn't particularly glamorous or Instagram-worthy. 12 months passed without a single word from Sarah, a period of complete silence that I maintained deliberately by avoiding social media entirely and politely declining any updates from mutual friends who occasionally tried to share news about her cross-country adventure or whatever came after it. I deleted all my social media accounts within a month of her departure, not out of bitterness but because I discovered that life felt more authentic when I wasn't constantly documenting it or comparing my progress to other people's highlight reels, and the absence of that digital noise created space for deeper focus on the projects and relationships that actually mattered. My home renovation reached completion that spring with the installation of custom hardwood floors I'd milled myself from reclaimed barn wood, the final step in a transformation that had taken the house from a deteriorating relic to a showcase of what patient, skilled work could accomplish over time. The woodworking passion that had started as a practical necessity evolved into something approaching artistry as I learned to see the potential in pieces that others considered damaged beyond repair, spending hours in my basement workshop creating furniture that combined traditional joinery techniques with modern design sensibilities that reflected both functionality and beauty. The community college approached me about teaching weekend workshops after seeing my work at several local craft fairs, and I discovered that I genuinely enjoyed sharing knowledge with people who appreciated the meditative aspects of working with their hands rather than just wanting quick results. My students ranged from retirees looking for meaningful hobbies to young professionals seeking alternatives to screen-based entertainment, and the relationships that developed around shared learning felt more substantial than any social connections I'd maintained during my marriage, built on mutual respect and common interests rather than convenience or habit. The furniture business had grown into a legitimate income stream that supplemented my project management salary, with a waiting list of customers who wanted custom pieces and referrals coming from satisfied clients who understood the value of commissioning work from someone who cared more about quality than speed. Teaching the workshops also connected me with other craftspeople in the area, and we'd formed an informal network of artisans who collaborated on larger projects and supported each other's businesses, the kind of professional community I'd never experienced in my corporate job where relationships were primarily competitive rather than collaborative. My confidence had evolved in ways I hadn't expected, not just from developing new skills but from proving to myself that I could create something meaningful and lasting without needing anyone else's approval or participation. Surrounded by a rescue cat who provided excellent company without requiring constant entertainment and neighbors who'd become genuine friends through shared appreciation for steady improvement rather than dramatic excitement. The contrast between my current life and the chaos of my marriage became more apparent with each passing month, as I learned to value the peace that comes from knowing exactly what you want and having the patience to build it properly, rather than constantly seeking external validation or stimulation to fill some internal void that no amount of adventure could actually satisfy. The first attempt at contact came through a text message from an unknown number on a Tuesday evening while I was teaching Charlie to stay off my workbench, a cryptic message that simply read, "I think I made a mistake," with no signature or context, as if the sender expected me to recognize their writing style through digital text. I deleted it without responding and went back to sanding the dining table I was refinishing for a client, but over the next 2 weeks similar messages appeared from different numbers with increasing desperation and decreasing subtlety. "Can we please talk about what happened?" came from a different area code, followed by, "I know you're getting these messages," from yet another number, and finally, "David, it's me, please just call me back," which at least had the courtesy of identifying the sender even though I'd already figured out who was behind this campaign of digital harassment. My policy was simple: delete immediately without reading completely, block the number, and continue with whatever I'd been doing before the interruption, treating these messages like spam calls rather than emotional manipulation attempts that deserved serious consideration or response. The escalation to family intervention came 3 weeks later when Sarah's sister Jennifer called my work number, which she'd apparently gotten from our old mutual friends, her voice carrying that strained cheerfulness people use when they're trying to convince themselves that their unreasonable request is actually perfectly logical. "David, I know this is awkward, but Sarah really needs to talk to you about some things that happened on her trip, and she's been trying to reach you but can't get through." I was in my office reviewing blueprints for a commercial renovation project, surrounded by the kind of detailed planning work that had always given me satisfaction, and the interruption felt like someone barging into a library to discuss reality television. "Jennifer, I appreciate the call, but Sarah and I don't have anything to discuss." She made her choice very clearly when she left for her adventure. The pause that followed suggested Jennifer hadn't expected such a direct response, and when she continued, her voice had shifted from cheerful to pleading in a way that told me more about Sarah's current situation than she probably intended to reveal. "Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but she's been staying on friends' couches since she got back from California, and she's in a really bad place emotionally. She keeps saying you're the only person who ever really understood her." The irony of Sarah claiming I understood her, given that she'd abandoned our marriage because I apparently understood nothing about her need for authentic experiences, wasn't lost on me, but I kept my response professional and brief. "I'm sorry she's having a difficult time, but that doesn't change anything between us. She's an adult who made an adult decision, and now she needs to handle the adult consequences." Jennifer tried several more approaches, including suggestions that I was being unnecessarily cruel and appeals to my sense of Christian charity, but I maintained the same calm boundary until she finally accepted that I wasn't going to be manipulated into resuming contact with someone who'd walked out of my life without looking back. The final escalation came 2 weeks later when Sarah's mother showed up at the construction site where I was overseeing the installation of custom millwork, wearing the kind of determined expression that suggested she'd prepared talking points and wasn't leaving without delivering them all. "David, I need to speak with you about Sarah," she announced without preamble, apparently assuming that showing up at my workplace would somehow carry more weight than a phone call or text message. I asked my foreman to take over the installation supervision and walked with her to a quiet area away from the construction noise, more out of professional courtesy than any desire to hear what she had to say about her daughter's situation. "She's in trouble, David. Real trouble. She won't tell me exactly what happened on that trip, but she came back completely different, scared and broke and sleeping on different couches every few nights." The picture she painted was of someone whose grand adventure had gone spectacularly wrong, but I found myself feeling the same detached sympathy I'd feel hearing about problems affecting any acquaintance who'd made consistently poor decisions. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Patterson, but Sarah and I are divorced, and her current problems aren't my responsibility to solve." Her eyes widened slightly at my use of the word divorced, and I realized that Sarah had probably been presenting our situation as a temporary separation rather than the permanent end I'd made it by filing papers 6 months earlier. "She needs someone stable in her life, David. Someone who actually cares about her future instead of just using her for whatever they can get." The irony of being described as stable by the mother of a woman who'd left me to go find herself with another man was almost amusing, but I kept my response straightforward and final. She had someone stable, and she chose adventure instead. "I hope she finds what she's looking for, but it won't be with me." Sarah appeared on my front porch on a rainy Thursday evening in late October, visibly pregnant and carrying a battered suitcase that looked like it had been through several bus stations, her face a mixture of desperation and shock as she took in the completely transformed Victorian house that bore no resemblance to the rundown property she'd probably expected to find. I was in my workshop finishing a custom bookshelf when Charlie started making the specific yowling noise he reserved for strangers on our property, and when I looked through the front window, I saw a figure huddled under the porch light that took me several seconds to recognize as my ex-wife. She was soaked from the rain, her hair hanging in wet strings around a face that looked older and more worn than I remembered, and the bulge under her oversized coat told a story that explained both her sudden appearance and her family's recent attempts to re-establish contact. "David, thank God you're home," she said when I opened the door, her voice carrying the kind of exhausted relief people have when they've run out of options and are grasping at their last remaining hope. "I wasn't sure you'd still be living in the same place." I stayed in the doorway, not inviting her in but not slamming the door either, while I processed the surreal experience of seeing the woman who'd abandoned our marriage for adventure now standing pregnant on the porch of a house she'd never seen. "This isn't the same place, Sarah. I moved over a year ago." Her eyes widened as she really looked at the house for the first time, taking in the restored Victorian details, the custom millwork, the professional landscaping that had transformed the property from a deteriorating eyesore into something that belonged in a home and garden magazine. "You bought a house?" "This house." The disbelief in her voice suggested she'd been operating under the assumption that I'd been frozen in time since her departure, waiting in our old apartment for her eventual return like some pathetic backup plan she could activate when her primary adventure went sideways. "When Jake told me he needed space to think about the baby, I came straight here because I knew you'd understand. But this," she gestured weakly at my beautifully renovated home, "this changes everything." The casual mention of Jake and a baby confirmed what I'd already figured out from her appearance, but hearing her speak about coming to me for understanding after abandoning our marriage for him struck me as absurdly presumptuous. "Jake left you?" It wasn't a question because her presence on my porch with a suitcase told the whole story without requiring additional explanation. She started crying then, not the manipulative tears she'd used during our marriage but the messy, exhausted sobs of someone whose carefully constructed fantasy had collapsed completely. "He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he'd never promised me anything permanent, that the whole road trip was just supposed to be fun without consequences." I watched her break down on my porch while Charlie observed from the window with the kind of detached interest cats show toward drama that doesn't directly affect their dinner schedule. "He took my money, David. Everything I had saved, plus money I borrowed from friends to help fund our adventure. He said we were building something real together, and then when I told him about the baby, he disappeared with my car and my credit cards." The picture she painted was of someone who'd been systematically used and discarded by a man who'd seen her coming from miles away, but I felt the same detached sympathy I'd experience hearing about any stranger's unfortunate travel experience. "I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm not sure why you're telling me about it." Her crying intensified as the reality of my indifference hit her, and she looked up at me with the kind of desperate hope people have when they're asking for miracles they know they don't deserve. Because you're the only real man I know who would make a good father, David. You're stable and responsible and kind, and I know I messed up terribly, but maybe we could start over and build something real together. The irony of being described as stable and responsible by someone who'd left me because those exact qualities made me boring wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral while she continued her pitch. I know this baby isn't yours, but you always said you wanted kids someday, and I could be the wife you deserved if you gave me another chance to prove myself. She was offering me the opportunity to raise another man's child with a woman who demonstrated that her commitment lasted exactly as long as something more exciting didn't present itself, apparently believing this constituted an attractive proposition. I looked at Sarah standing on my porch in the rain, pregnant with another man's child and asking me to rescue her from the consequences of her own choices, and felt nothing but a calm certainty about what needed to be said. Sarah, when you walked out of our marriage to find yourself with Jake, you dissolved any obligation I had to your future or your problems. Her face crumpled as the words hit her, but I continued with the same measured tone I'd used to explain a construction delay to a client. I'm not going to become a father to another man's child simply because your adventure didn't work out the way you planned. She stepped closer to the door, her desperation becoming more apparent as she realized that tears and appeals to my better nature weren't going to work the way they had during our marriage. David, I know I hurt you terribly, but people make mistakes. I was young and confused and I chose wrong, but that doesn't mean we can't fix this. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the receipt from the homeless shelter, the piece of paper I'd carried for over a year as a reminder of exactly how completely I'd closed the door on our relationship. This is the receipt from when I donated the money from your engagement ring to charity. $3,200 that went to help people who actually needed it. Her eyes went wide as she processed what I was telling her, the final piece of evidence that I hadn't been waiting around hoping for her return. You sold my ring? The possessive language wasn't lost on me, referring to a ring she'd abandoned along with our marriage as if it had somehow remained her property during her cross-country adventure. I sold the ring I bought for someone who turned out not to exist, and I used the money to help people who didn't abandon their responsibilities for excitement. She stared at the receipt in my hand like it represented something she couldn't quite comprehend, the physical proof that I'd moved forward instead of remaining frozen in place waiting for her to come back. This is my baby, David. Your chance to be a father like you always wanted. The desperation in her voice was reaching a pitch that suggested she was running out of rational arguments and moving toward emotional manipulation. I wanted to be a father with someone who wanted to be a mother with me, not with someone who saw me as a convenient backup plan when her first choice disappeared. I folded the receipt and put it back in my wallet, next to her goodbye note, two pieces of paper that told the complete story of how little I'd meant to her when she had other options. I'm going to stay on this porch until you change your mind, she announced with the kind of stubborn determination that suggested she'd confused persistence with persuasion. I don't have anywhere else to go, and I know you're not cruel enough to let a pregnant woman sleep outside. The threat was delivered with enough conviction that I realized she actually intended to follow through, turning my front porch into a camping spot until I agreed to rescue her from her own decisions. Sarah, you need to leave my property now, or I'm going to call the police for trespassing. Her expression shifted from desperate to angry as she realized that even pregnancy wasn't going to guilt me into taking responsibility for her situation. You've changed, David. The man I married would never have been this cold and heartless. I pulled out my phone and started dialing while she continued her accusation, and when she saw the numbers appearing on my screen, her defiance cracked slightly. The man you married was someone you walked out on because he wasn't exciting enough. This is who I became after learning that lesson. The 911 operator answered professionally, and I explained the situation calmly while Sarah stood there realizing that I was actually going to follow through on my threat. I have my ex-wife on my property refusing to leave after I've asked her multiple times, and I need an officer to document the trespassing for a potential restraining order. Sarah grabbed her suitcase and started backing away from the door, finally understanding that I wasn't bluffing about involving law enforcement in her attempt to force her way back into my life. This isn't over, David. You can't just pretend I don't exist forever. I watched her walk away in the rain while staying on the line with the operator, making sure to get a case number and documentation of the incident in case her desperation led to further harassment attempts. After she disappeared down the street, I closed the door and returned to my workshop where Charlie was waiting by his food bowl, completely unbothered by the drama that had just played out on our porch. I finished the bookshelf I'd been working on while Sarah had been making her appeal, sanding the final joints with the same careful attention to detail that had become my approach to everything in life since learning the difference between building something that lasts and settling for something that just looks good temporarily. The next morning, I started planning a weekend trip to an antique auction 2 hours north of town, excited about the possibility of finding interesting pieces for my restoration business and looking forward to the drive through fall foliage with Charlie riding shotgun in his travel carrier. Life had become exactly what I'd built it to be: peaceful, productive, and entirely on my own terms, surrounded by work I loved and a cat who appreciated consistency over excitement.